Finally, we're going to talk about conclusions. So just like with introductions, the conclusion should be about 10% of the essay, and there are specific functions for a conclusion. Deal with the main function is the conclusions that should summarize the argument. So you're making an argument throughout the body of the essay, and you want to summarize that argument in the conclusion. It shouldn't just be a restatement of your thesis and your criteria. Instead, you want to look through each part of the body and bring in something specific from each part in order to kind of provide that last final argument. For instance, we can look at this conclusion here. You can go ahead and pause and read through this just to see how it summarizes specific items from the body of the essay. Just like with introductions, we want to hook the reader. With conclusions, I'm going to give you 6 methods for kind of leaving that lasting impression for your reader. We can end with an anecdote. We can end with a quote, an explanation, factor figure, an explanation, ask one last question. So these will look familiar as the same methods that we use to introduce the papers, but we're going to add 2 more. The first one is we can predict the future, and then we can challenge the readers. So let's look through these more specifically. So with an anecdote, think of a topic like corporal punishment or spanking children. We might give all of the facts and information from the experts, might be behavioralists or behavioral psychologists, or it might be child psychologists, whatever it is. We then might end with a personal story to illustrate, maybe how you felt when you were spanked or something that correlates with the evidence. So ending with an anecdote can be nice because it provides that kind of real world situation. And it is the last impression that you make on the reader, so you want to make sure that it does illustrate the thesis. We want to make sure that in all of our conclusions that the thesis has been supported and the conclusion should show that. Again, we want it to be 10% of the essay for the conclusion, and we still want to summarize their points. So we don't want this great big long anecdote. We just want something short, maybe just a minute or 2 of an example that we can bring in as a story. We can end with a quote or explanation. So just like in the introduction, we do need to explain the quote. But you might think of a quote that you found that you really like and say that would be a last final impression that you want to leave with your reader. So ending with a quote and an explanation is also a valid way to conclude the essay. You again want to make sure you explain it. If your reader has to interpret, they might interpret it incorrectly, and that could ruin the entire essay at this point. Facts and figures. So just like with the quote, we want to explain the factor figure, and it should sum up your points. We don't want to get into new argument or bring up new points. We're still thinking of summarizing our main argument here. So if you find a factor figure is maybe surprising or unknown, it would be a great way to end the essay to keep your reader thinking beyond the argument that you've made, but always make sure you verify the facts that you're using. Again, asking a revealing question. This works differently than in the introduction. In the introduction, you'll ask the question and usually it'll be answered somewhere in the essay. For the conclusion, we want to ask a question that keeps the reader thinking beyond the essay itself. Okay, so again, we want it to be close-ended. We don't want to be something easily answered. And you want to make sure that it will provoke that thought for your readers beyond the essay. Just like with the other conclusions, no new material. We don't want to ask a question that maybe diverges from the argument we've just made. And then we want to be careful when we know that we're going to have an unfavorable reader. If I'm arguing that students should pay extra for online classes, for instance, I know that students are not going to want that argument. And so I need to be careful of the question I ask because I don't want to provide a question in which we're now again on opposite sides or adversarial. Let's get to the other two. Now we can predict the future, and you might not believe that you can predict the future, but we're going to test it out. Can you predict whether or not a slide is going to follow this one? We think of how we would answer that. We would say, we know that there's still one last method, which is to challenge the reader. We've seen multiple slides already. So based on the information that we have, we can predict that another slide is coming. So when we're predicting the future, it's good for persuasive essays that we're encouraging one plan or one method over another, because we can say, if all of these things that I mentioned in the body of my essay are true, then we should do this, or then this will work. Okay, so we're making a prediction based on what's in the body of the essay. So it's not predicting the future using a crystal ball or the things that we think of in predicting the future. It's really just using logic or if-then statements. If all of these things are true, then this should be true. And then we can challenge our readers. I like the use of challenging the readers because it usually shows that you have written this for a purpose. You want something to change or you want something to be done. So challenging the reader shows kind of the sincerity in what you're writing. Again, if you have a hostile audience, if I'm writing about paying extra for online classes, I'm not going to challenge you to, talk to the dean or talk to the president of the university to raise these rates. The challenge might just be, to think about the arguments that I've made. Make sure that when you're doing a challenge that it's something that your reader can do. I read an essay once on recycling, and at the end, the author challenged the readers to do, I think, 15 things, which seemed overwhelming, and so I ended up doing none of them. If the challenge was maybe to donate papers to a recycling bin or something like that, or sort your garbage, that I might have done. But there were so many things that it just seemed unfeasible for me. And then ask yourself if you'd be willing to do the same thing. And that can help you determine whether your challenge is too difficult or not. I remember it was a campaign on commercialism, and they wanted to take a day in which nobody bought anything. And I thought this was a great program. It would really teach us something about how our economy works, especially if purchases weren't made for one whole day. The day, however, that they picked was the day after Thanksgiving, which we know is a major shopping day. And so really that challenge was wasted on most of the readers. Hopefully now you have a better idea on introductions and conclusions. I would say for this paper, get started on your research, start gathering articles. For this paper, you're more likely to use quotes than you will summaries and paraphrases, as in the last essay. So maybe start pulling those quotes out and putting them into categories so that you can start to create an outline for the essay. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to email me or to use my office hours.